So I guess I would like to also, go into your book because I think, in your book, it kind of interested me, which is called, the title was literally called Doomed to Fail.
Doomed to Fail, why government is incapable of living up to our hopes.
Yeah.
So the book takes ideas from my early days as a physicist, the ideas of complex adaptive systems. There's a lot of research done on that in the 1980s, 1990s, especially in particle physics, the field that I was involved in.
Right.
But human society is a complex adaptive system. And there's important mathematics of these systems. They're highly nonlinear. They tend to obey power laws. They're deeply interconnected, which means classic techniques of Stoic philosophers of solving complicated problems, breaking a problem down into its component parts, getting experts to solve each of those components and then reconstitute the whole. That technique will work for problems which are complicated, provided they're linear. It will not work for complex problems because they're highly nonlinear. And then the final element is that of adaptivity, the fact that the models, the fact that society changes over time in ways that are completely unpredictable or unexpected. And you put all these elements together, that's the reason why the future is fundamentally unknowable.
Right.
And in a future which is unknowable, our leaders, our political leaders, they are bound to make mistakes. Even the smartest people around, trying to do their best, trying to do a good job, it's inevitable they will do things which later on, in the fullness of time, will turn out to have been mistakes. And society will want to get rid of those methods, those ways, and change policy. Because politicians become very associated with the policies that they espoused, we want to change the policy, we want to change the politician. And here's the beauty of democracy. The reason why democracy is the best form of political organization is that it provides a peaceful mechanism for getting rid of failed leaders and replacing them with new leaders who will go on to fail in their own way in due course, of course. But democracy is a peaceful way for society to make course corrections and project forward and improve our lives. In contrast, autocracies like Xi Jinping's China and Vladimir Putin's Russia, those leaders make mistakes every bit as much as democratic leaders make mistakes. But there's no peaceful way of getting rid of them. And so autocrats double down on their mistakes.
Right.
They find enemies within their own population, like the Uyghurs in Western China, and they penalize them as a means of drumming up support amongst the majority parts of the population. They wage war against their neighbors, as Putin is doing in Ukraine, in order to get people on side benefit from the rally around the flag effect and increase support. So autocracies are extremely dangerous bodies. They're far more likely to go to war against other people. Not to say that democracies can't go to war. Of course they can, but they're much less likely to do so. And they do so only when they are provoked. And that's why democracy is the best form of political organization. And it's the reason why we should protect our democracy. For the same reason, capitalism is the best form of economic organization, because the reality is that most businesses fail. The overwhelming majority of businesses fail within their first few years, sometimes because they're just bad ideas, sometimes they're good ideas, but the timing's not right, or they can't get the funding, or there's regulatory problems, whatever it is. But most businesses fail. And so capitalism provides a sifting, a filtering mechanism to quickly kill off the failing businesses without destroying too much capital, enabling the small number of successful businesses to propagate forward into the future, preserve enough capital to support them. In contrast, centrally planned economies like what the Soviet Union used to be and China is now, they put huge state backing, state power, state finance behind the businesses. Most of those businesses fail at the same rate, but when they fail, they destroy huge amounts of capital, and there's insufficient left to invest in what would have been the few successful businesses. And that's why capitalist economies outperform centrally planned economies over time. And so these filtering mechanisms that capitalism is in the case of business, and democracies in the way of filtering out, getting rid of bad leaders, replacing them with, hopefully better ones, allowing society to take a step forward. this is very similar to Darwinian evolution. It's a very similar kind of mechanism of in a changing environment, you have organisms which are capable of changing both through having sex and giving rise to a new genetic structure in the offspring, plus the fact that there are failures in DNA replication from one generation to the next that allows changes, and those changes allow those organisms which are most successful in a new adapting environment, it allows those to propagate forward. That's the underlying element behind Darwinian evolution. And it's the same winnowing mechanism, filtering mechanism to filter out those things which can be successful in the future. So it's a very powerful technique. Yeah. And so I say democracy, capitalism, very important, very powerful things which need to be defended. And yet today there's been a massive loss of faith in democracy and capitalism to deliver fair outcomes for people. And there's never just one reason why that is. There are always several reasons. Part of it is globalization and the hollowing out of the middle classes as jobs got shipped off to low-cost centers in China and India and other parts of Southeast Asia. So that's part of it. But a big part of it as well is the global financial crisis of 16 years ago. So in the second half of my book, I talk about what caused the global financial crisis. And that was caused by, inadvertently, not deliberately, but it was caused by mismanagement of monetary policy by the Federal Reserve and the world's other central banks, the Bank of England in the United Kingdom and the European Central Bank in Europe. But the Federal Reserve is the most important central bank in the world, so it is the leader. So mismanagement of monetary policy since at least the days of Alan Greenspan in 1987. And that gave rise to the crisis, the misregulation of the banks, mistaken, poorly thought out methods of regulating the banks. That's why the global financial crisis is as bad as it was. And we didn't really learn anything. The central bankers, bank regulators didn't really learn anything from that crisis because the new regulations that were put in place afterwards, we led to the mini crisis early last year, the Silicon Valley Bank, the failure of Credit Suisse, and so on. So all of these things are things that I was, in effect, been predicting in earlier talks that I've given, and I explained it more fully in my book, Doomed to Fail. So I explain why the central banks got that wrong and what they should do instead, a better way forward for both bank regulation and for the management of monetary policy.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting. And I kind of really like the fact just what you laid out was really a good fundamental thing. And I think people, and I think your book, it's really, really important people should know about to actually learn what's kind of happening with the world around us and just how a lot of us is taking kind of over and what you can do to be cause and like how you can actually handle certain things. I know like you mentioned before about how businesses are just like, they're affected by certain things and the government's how they're running and organizational, right? So do you think in terms of businesses, right, that we have in our society today, do you think either by reading the book or do you think by handling things differently, do you think there can be a different outcome in terms of what you were talking about?